2 days after 60-year-old Jennifer marries 29-year-old James, the unthinkable happens. But what if this marriage was only the beginning of a chilling, deadly plot? Stay tuned as we uncover the truth behind this tragic story. Was this love gone wrong? Or was it all a cold and calculated scheme from the start? What drove James to do the unthinkable? In the bustling city of Chicago, Illinois, 60-year-old Jennifer was a woman of grace and charm. She had spent her life building a successful career and a comfortable home. Her friends described her as warm-hearted and generous, always ready to lend a helping hand. Yet, despite her accomplishments, there was a void in her life, a longing for companionship and love. Enter 29-year-old James, a man whose presence was magnetic, with a smile that could light up a room and a demeanor that exuded confidence. He quickly became the center of attention. He was new to town, a traveler with tales of distant lands and adventures. His stories captivated Jennifer, and before long, they were inseparable. Their whirlwind romance was the talk of the town. Friends and family watched in awe as the unlikely couple seemed to defy the odds. They were the perfect match, or so it appeared. The age difference, the contrasting backgrounds, none of it mattered. They were in love. 2 days after their intimate wedding ceremony, tragedy struck. Jennifer was found lifeless in her home, a victim of what appeared to be a sudden illness. The community was stunned. How could this happen? What went wrong? As investigators dig deeper into the case, they uncovered a web of deceit and manipulation. The charming traveler was not who he claimed to be. His past was shrouded in mystery, and his intentions were far from noble. The marriage, it seemed, was merely a means to an end, a calculated move in a deadly game. But what drove James to commit such a heinous act? Was it greed, revenge, or something darker? The answers lay hidden beneath layers of lies and half-truths, waiting to be uncovered. Before we go into today's story, make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update. We've got some truly shocking cases coming up, and you won't want to miss a single one. Jennifer, a 60-year-old woman, was known in her community in Chicago as a pillar of strength. With a successful career and a well-established life, she had worked hard to achieve the life she led. A savvy businesswoman, Jennifer was a woman who had it all: wealth, influence, and the respect of everyone who knew her. Yet, beneath the polished surface, Jennifer harbored a quiet loneliness. Despite her success, she longed for a connection, someone to share her life with. Enter 29-year-old James, a man who seemed to embody all the qualities Jennifer had been waiting for. With his striking looks, quick wit, and magnetic personality, James quickly charmed his way into Jennifer's life. A man of few details, James painted a picture of a romantic wanderer, a man who had traveled the world and seen things most people could only dream of. To Jennifer, James seemed like the answer to her long-held desire for companionship. She was drawn to him, and soon the two became inseparable. Their whirlwind romance moved faster than anyone could have predicted. Jennifer's friends and family were initially supportive, though some raised an eyebrow at the unusual age gap between the two. Jennifer was nearly 3 decades older than James, but that didn't seem to matter. To her, James was the love she had been searching for. To James, however, Jennifer represented something far more valuable than love. As their relationship blossomed, so too did the whispers. James had a past, a history that he kept tightly guarded. The man who had won Jennifer's heart with his smooth talk and charming smile had a trail of secrets. His romantic pursuits had always been targeted at wealthy women, ones who could give him exactly what he needed. But no one knew this at the time. Jennifer and James married in a quiet ceremony, surrounded by close friends and family. The couple was radiant, and it seemed like a fairy tale. Their age difference was often discussed in hushed tones, but no one could deny the connection they appeared to share. The suddenness of their marriage raised suspicions among a few of Jennifer's closest friends, who questioned James's intentions. Some speculated that he had swept Jennifer off her feet too quickly, but the people closest to Jennifer dismissed these concerns as mere jealousy or misunderstanding. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like this video. It helps us reach more people who need to hear these chilling true crime cases. Share this video with a friend who loves a good mystery, and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is going to happen next? The wedding had been everything Jennifer had dreamed of, a celebration of love, a new chapter in her life. As she stood beside James, the man who had swept her off her feet, everything felt perfect. Their vows were exchanged with sincerity, and for a brief moment, it seemed like all of her loneliness and longing had vanished. In James, she had found someone who made her feel truly seen, someone who paid attention to every detail, from the way she smiled to the way she spoke about her dreams. He seemed like the perfect partner, someone who would be there for her through thick and thin. But as the days passed, cracks began to appear in the facade. James, though kind and attentive, was always a little too eager, a little too quick to reassure her. It didn't take long for Jennifer's friends to notice how fast he was moving, how quickly he seemed to be pushing their relationship forward. Some of them, in the back of their minds, questioned whether it was genuine. Was James really in love with Jennifer, or was he simply after something more? Jennifer had always been a woman of reason. She had built a life of success based on careful decisions and calculated risks. But when it came to James, her heart had overpowered her instincts. She ignored the small but growing unease that crept into her mind. He was always there, ready to take charge of everything. He encouraged her to make decisions quickly, almost too quickly. He had helped her adjust her will, pressuring her to update her beneficiaries to include him. He convinced her to give him power of attorney, insisting it would make life easier for her, especially as they started planning for their future together. Looking back, Jennifer's friends would later admit they had seen the warning signs. James was always just a little too perfect, a little too charming. He seemed to understand Jennifer's every need before she even voiced them. But there was one thing that no one suspected. James wasn't just interested in being Jennifer's husband. He had an agenda. James's past was a carefully guarded secret. His charm was no accident, and his ability to win over older, wealthier women wasn't a stroke of luck. In fact, James had built an unsettling pattern of targeting women like Jennifer, women with wealth and influence, whose affections could grant him access to the life he wanted. He had a history of being in relationships with older women, all of whom seemed to fall for his charismatic charm. But once he secured what he needed, they were discarded. Or worse, they ended up dead. James knew exactly how to manipulate a woman's emotions, how to create the illusion of deep affection, even when his motives were far more selfish. Jennifer had believed she was the one he truly loved. But for James, Jennifer was simply the latest pawn in a game he had been playing for years. He had learned how to weave his web of deceit, how to gain control over every aspect of her life. He had become indispensable, never allowing her to feel alone or unsupported. Every conversation seemed to lead back to her trust in him, her reliance on him. As their marriage progressed, James subtly took control of Jennifer's finances. He urged her to make investments in projects he was interested in. He convinced her to make a number of large transfers, assuring her that they were part of their future together. Jennifer, trusting her new husband completely, signed the documents without hesitation, never questioning the sudden urgency or the reasoning behind his actions. He made sure everything was in his favor. But not everything was as it seemed. Jennifer's friends noticed her growing isolation. She had been a woman who enjoyed the company of others, yet now she seemed to retreat into the background, allowing James to take charge of every situation. When they asked her about the changes, she brushed it off with a smile. "James just wants to take care of me," she would say, her voice filled with affection. Yet, behind the smiles and reassurances, there was a quiet discomfort among those who knew her best. James, it seemed, had succeeded in gaining control of her life, all while presenting himself as the caring, doting husband. But as their wedding night came to an end, something far darker began to take root. Jennifer had unknowingly placed herself at the center of a deadly scheme, one that James had carefully crafted for months, if not years. Just 2 days after their wedding, something horrifying happened. The woman who had once been filled with joy and love was found dead in her home. The cause? A sudden, unexplained illness. But as investigators would later discover, Jennifer's death was no accident. It was the culmination of a plan set in motion long before she had met James. The seemingly perfect marriage had quickly turned into a nightmare, but it would take time for the truth to surface. What began as a story of love and happiness was now a tragic tale of manipulation, greed, and betrayal. Before Jennifer and James's marriage, the cracks that had initially appeared started to widen. It wasn't long before James began suggesting important changes to Jennifer's financial and legal affairs. He was always so reassuring, always reminding her how much he cared for her. But with every suggestion, the control he gained over her life deepened. It started innocently enough. James suggested updating Jennifer's will, citing how a married couple's legal matters should be aligned for convenience. Jennifer, trusting him completely, agreed without hesitation. "We're in this together now," James had told her. He assured her that it would be a simple process, and so they called a lawyer. Jennifer signed the paperwork, changing her will to include James as the sole beneficiary of her estate. James didn't stop there. He convinced Jennifer to grant him power of attorney, promising it would make managing their financial affairs smoother. He took charge of her bank accounts, her investments, and even her business dealings. Jennifer never questioned it. James was always there to take care of her, to make her life easier. The more control he had, the more dependent Jennifer became on him. He was her protector, her husband, the one who knew what was best. Even the investigators, who would later look into Jennifer's sudden death, missed the red flags. They were blinded by the couple's seemingly perfect relationship. James was the grieving husband, the heartbroken man who had lost the woman he loved. How could anyone suspect him? How could anyone imagine that the young, charming man had manipulated Jennifer into a corner where her wealth was all that mattered? But the truth, as it often does, was more complicated. The more James tightened his grip on Jennifer's life, the more he stood to gain. Her money, her business, her assets, they were all now in his control. It was as if he had been preparing for the inevitable, positioning himself perfectly for when Jennifer's life would come to a sudden end. And then, just 2 days after their wedding, Jennifer's sudden death sent shockwaves through everyone who knew her. She was found in her home, unresponsive, as if she had simply passed in her sleep. The cause of death was attributed to a heart attack or perhaps an illness, something that seemed sudden, unexpected, and impossible to predict. But those closest to her were left in disbelief. How could someone so full of life, someone so vibrant, just slip away like that? The suddenness of Jennifer's death was shocking. It didn't make sense. The woman who had been so happy, so full of love just days earlier, was now gone, leaving only a trail of confusion and unanswered questions. James, though visibly shaken, appeared to handle the tragedy with an unsettling calmness. He was, after all, the man who would inherit everything. Jennifer's friends were stunned by the speed at which things unfolded. One moment they had been celebrating her new marriage, and the next they were attending her funeral, trying to make sense of it all. Some wondered if James was truly heartbroken, or if he was simply playing his part in a carefully rehearsed performance. The police, at first, saw nothing unusual about Jennifer's death. A heart attack was a reasonable explanation, given her age. But as the days passed, whispers began to spread. Friends and family began to question whether James's involvement in Jennifer's affairs was more than just that of a loving husband. The more they thought about it, the more they began to see how everything had been set up so perfectly for him to benefit. Jennifer's death, tragic as it was not an isolated incident. There were other women who had fallen victim to James's charm. His history, once buried deep in the past, began to surface. Like a predator who had found his prey, James had targeted women with wealth, women who had no idea they were walking straight into his trap. Jennifer was the fifth, but she wouldn't be the last if he wasn't stopped. When Jennifer was found dead in her home, the initial response from the police was one of routine. A 60-year-old woman who had been married just days before was discovered in what appeared to be a peaceful, if somewhat tragic, end, likely caused by a heart attack. It was the sort of thing that, while sad, was not out of the ordinary for someone her age. The police, faced with the suddenness of her passing, believed the case was closed. No foul play was suspected. After all, Jennifer had been in good health, or so it seemed. For the first few days, James, her young husband, was the picture of sorrow. He made all the right moves, arranging her funeral, speaking tearfully about their short but meaningful marriage, and comforting the family. No one had reason to suspect him. He was the grieving widower, and as far as the authorities could tell, the cause of death seemed natural enough. However, as time passed, a nagging feeling lingered among Jennifer's closest friends. Something about the situation didn't sit right with them. They couldn't shake the eerie calmness James displayed in the days following her death. His responses seemed rehearsed, almost too perfect. He was unfazed by the sudden loss, going through the motions of grief without ever showing the deep emotional shock that most people would expect. His composed demeanor was not only unsettling to Jennifer's family and friends, but also to the police officers who had been involved in the case. As the investigation continued, there were some discrepancies that couldn't be ignored. For one, the speed with which James had taken control of Jennifer's financial and legal matters raised eyebrows. It wasn't long before investigators started asking questions about her will and the power of attorney documents James had helped Jennifer sign just days before her death. They quickly learned that Jennifer's wealth had been transferred into James's hands in a way that didn't seem quite right. There were also reports of strange transactions made from her accounts, money moved to offshore accounts, investments in James's name that had nothing to do with Jennifer's original plans. Yet, the authorities didn't immediately connect the dots between Jennifer's death and previous cases. It wasn't the first time someone had mysteriously died under similar circumstances. Other women, wealthy older women, had been the victims of strange deaths that were initially written off as heart attacks or illnesses. Each one, like Jennifer, had been involved with a younger man, someone who was charming and appeared to care for them. But these deaths were never properly linked, and investigators failed to see the pattern. Jennifer's case, like those before hers, should have raised a red flag. But the authorities were slow to pick up on the commonalities. They failed to consider that James's behavior, though outwardly calm, might be a deliberate attempt to cover his tracks. He had been through this before, and he knew exactly how to act. His lack of visible grief, his efficient handling of Jennifer's affairs, his quickness in dealing with her death, these were all signs that were missed, dismissed as nothing more than the actions of a man who was simply moving on with his life. James's behavior in the aftermath of Jennifer's death raised more suspicions when it came to light that he had already started to sell off her assets. He was clearing out her home, liquidating her business, and moving money into his own accounts. He was swift and precise, as if he had been planning this for much longer than anyone had realized. His every move seemed calculated, designed to make it appear as though nothing was out of the ordinary. Despite the mounting evidence, the authorities were hesitant to make any assumptions. They couldn't yet prove James's involvement in Jennifer's death, and there were too many pieces of the puzzle that didn't fit together. But the question remained: how many women had James manipulated in this same way? And how many more would fall victim to his carefully planned schemes? The news of Jennifer's sudden death was a heavy blow, but it was only the beginning of the emotional toll her family and friends would endure. For those who had been closest to her, the shock of her passing was compounded by the dawning realization that they may have been duped by James. Jennifer's family, especially her children, began to reflect on the last months of her life. How could they have missed the signs? How had she been so easily manipulated into trusting James, a man they had only just begun to know? Jennifer's closest friends were devastated. They had witnessed her transformation from an independent, vibrant woman into someone who seemed to rely entirely on James. They recalled the way she spoke about him with glowing affection, how she had dismissed their concerns about the speed of their marriage. In hindsight, they began to piece together the subtle manipulations they had witnessed. James had always been present, always in control, always the one making the decisions. Jennifer had been too trusting, too enamored with him, to see the warning signs. The realization that they might have been complicit in Jennifer's demise left everyone in a state of disbelief and guilt. Her friends and family began to question their own roles in her life. Had they failed her by not speaking out more forcefully against her new relationship? Had they not paid enough attention when things started to seem off? But even as Jennifer's loved ones struggled with their grief, they began to dig deeper into James's past. The more they uncovered, the clearer it became that Jennifer wasn't the first, and certainly not the last, woman he had targeted. James's history of preying on wealthy women slowly came to light. It wasn't hard to find a pattern. He had been involved with several older women before Jennifer, all of whom had been similarly swept off their feet by his charm. These women, like Jennifer, were all in stable financial positions, and like Jennifer, they had all trusted him enough to allow him control over their personal affairs. One by one, they had met untimely, unexplained deaths. Deaths that had been brushed off by authorities as either heart attacks, accidents, or natural causes. But now, in the wake of Jennifer's death, a chilling truth was emerging. James was no stranger to these women's deaths. He had orchestrated them, and Jennifer had simply been the most recent victim in a long line of tragedies. As investigators began to piece together the timeline of James's life, it became clear that this wasn't a coincidence. Over the past few years, he had used the same script to ensnare wealthy women. He would charm them, win their trust, and then slowly take control of their financial assets, often advising them to change their wills and make him the beneficiary. Once they had signed over power of attorney and legal control, their fate was sealed. James's behavior had become disturbingly predictable. But Jennifer's case had brought everything into focus. The authorities soon uncovered that James had not only been involved with previous victims, but that his manipulation had gone further. He had buried their financial records, hidden evidence of his involvement in their deaths, and moved swiftly to claim their assets after they were gone. But with Jennifer, the investigators finally began to connect the dots. It wasn't until Jennifer's will and financial records were examined more closely that the full extent of James's actions became clear. The power of attorney he had secured just days before her death had been pivotal. He had orchestrated the entire thing, making sure Jennifer's wealth flowed directly to him. But it was his lack of grief and his immediate actions following her death, clearing out her house, selling her property, and transferring funds, that gave investigators the evidence they needed. Through painstaking forensic accounting, the authorities were able to trace the movements of Jennifer's money, which had all been funneled into James's accounts just hours after her death. This was the breakthrough the case needed. With this evidence, they were able to arrest James and charge him with murder, fraud, and theft. But the story didn't end there. As the investigation continued, even more shocking revelations came to light. James's previous victims, whose deaths had initially been deemed natural, were now being reopened. The investigators connected them to the pattern of manipulation and control James had employed. The chilling truth was that Jennifer wasn't his fifth victim. It was simply the most recent. His actions had stretched far beyond what anyone had realized. And now, as the authorities uncovered more, it was clear that he had been getting away with this for years. Just as the case seemed to be wrapping up, a final bombshell emerged. It was discovered that James had been in contact with several other women during his time with Jennifer. Women who had yet to come forward. These women, still alive but now terrified, were shaken by the fact that they too had been manipulated by James. Some had not even realized the extent of his control over them. They had, like Jennifer, been charmed by his smooth demeanor and persuasive words. They hadn't seen him for the predator he truly was, but now they were coming forward, one by one, to share their stories. James's arrest marked the end of his reign over these vulnerable women, but it also marked the beginning of a long road to justice. His past would be unraveled, his deceit exposed for all to see, and the damage he had done would never be forgotten. But for Jennifer's family and friends, it was too late. The loss was irrevocable. Their grief was compounded by the realization that they had been unable to protect her from a man who had been preying on women like her for years. The final reveal of James's true nature brought no closure, only more questions. How many more victims were there? How many more lives had he ruined before finally being caught? As the investigation unraveled James's dark past, many questions arose. What drove this man to target women like Jennifer? Why wealthy, older women who were ready for companionship and love? The answer might seem simple at first: greed. After all, Jennifer wasn't the first wealthy woman James had manipulated. But could there have been something more to his actions? Was this purely about money, or did something deeper drive him to prey on women in such a calculated and horrific way? Greed undoubtedly played a major role in James's actions, but was it the sole motivation? Some might argue that his targets, wealthy older women, were a reflection of his own insecurities or his desire for a life he could never achieve through honest means. Perhaps his need for money and power stemmed from a deeper dissatisfaction with his own life. He saw wealth as a way to overcome his own shortcomings, to prove to the world, and to himself, that he was more than just a charming man. He could be someone important, someone who mattered. Another theory is that James's actions could be rooted in something far darker: revenge. It's possible that his past, perhaps a difficult childhood or past relationships gone wrong, fueled his belief that the world owed him something. Women who were older and wealthier could be seen as symbols of a society he felt alienated from, and his manipulation of them might have been a way to regain control. What if James wasn't just after wealth, but after retribution? In this case, the act of targeting older, wealthy women could be his way of settling an internal score, punishing those who represented a life he could never truly attain. Was it all about the money? Or was it, in part, about taking something from women who were comfortable, successful, and seemingly untouchable? Jennifer's wealth, though not the sole factor, made her a prime target. Older, wealthier women are often seen as more vulnerable, particularly when they may be looking for companionship or love. What might have helped was more awareness of the emotional vulnerabilities that often accompany people in Jennifer's position. If her friends and family had recognized the psychological aspects at play, her longing for a deep connection, her trust in James, they might have been able to intervene before the manipulation reached its peak. But would anything have stopped James? Could anyone have predicted how far he would go to get what he wanted? The sad truth is that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who wear the most convincing mask. James's ability to blend in, to convince others he was just another man in love, was perhaps the greatest weapon he had. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below and share any theories or insights you have on this case. Do you believe more could have been done? Or is this just the result of a man who was always a step ahead? If you've ever witnessed similar signs of manipulation or control in your own life or someone else's, share your experiences with us. How would you have handled it if you had known the truth? We've covered a lot of ground today, but before we wrap up, I'd really appreciate it if you could like this video and comment with your theories. Do you think this case could have been prevented? And if you haven't already, subscribe and turn on your notifications, because we've got 115 true crime stories lined up, and you won't want to miss any of them. James was arrested and charged with multiple crimes, including the murder of Jennifer, as well as several counts of fraud and manipulation. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he would never again have the chance to manipulate another victim. The public reaction was one of shock and disbelief, as many people couldn't fathom how someone so seemingly charming could be capable of such cruelty. Jennifer's family, though relieved that justice had been served, would forever feel the sting of their loss. The ripple effect of this case reached beyond just Jennifer's loved ones. It served as a chilling reminder of how easily someone can exploit the vulnerabilities of others. How love, when twisted, can become a deadly weapon. The case also raised important questions about the vulnerability of older, wealthy women, and how their emotional needs can sometimes leave them open to manipulation and deceit. Thank you for joining us in unraveling this shocking true crime story. If you found this case as disturbing and thought-provoking as we did, please take a moment to like, comment, and share this video with others who may be interested in true crime stories like this. And remember, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you're the first to know when we release the next investigations into real-life mysteries and criminal cases. Turn on notifications so you won't miss out on our future uploads. Your support helps us bring more stories to light and keep the conversation going. Let us know your thoughts on this case and share any theories or insights you have in the comments. We look forward to hearing from you.